Sherlock Holmes and the Case of the Missing Guest of Ravenshire Hall. Chapter 1. The Invitation from Ravenshire. In the autumn of 1893, London lay beneath a curtain of yellow fog, so dense that the lamps along Baker Street seemed little more than floating halos suspended in darkness. The city moved as it always did, carriages rattling over wet cobblestones, vendors shouting through the mist, and hurried pedestrians disappearing into the gloom like phantoms. It was upon one such evening that I found myself seated opposite my friend Sherlock Holmes in the familiar sitting room of 221B Baker Street. A coal fire burned brightly in the grate. Holmes lounged in his armchair, his long fingers pressed together beneath his sharp chin, while a violin rested across his knees. He had not played a note for nearly an hour. This alone told me that his mind was occupied. For Holmes, inactivity was often more dangerous than action. When deprived of an intellectual challenge, he became restless, irritable, and prone to sinking into long periods of silence that concerned me greatly. The room was littered with newspapers. Several had been discarded onto the floor, others lay folded upon the table. Holmes had examined every one, yet none had provided the stimulation he sought. "It appears, Watson," he said suddenly, "that criminal ingenuity has entered a period of decline." I looked up from my medical journal. "That is a remarkable conclusion." "Not at all." He waved a hand toward the newspapers. "Observe these headlines: embezzlement, fraud, domestic poisoning, counterfeit notes. Each crime is committed with all the subtlety of a brass band. You sound disappointed." "I am." Holmes rose and crossed to the window. Outside, the fog swirled against the glass. "A truly intelligent criminal," he continued, "is becoming increasingly rare. Most citizens would regard that as good news." "Most citizens," replied Holmes dryly, "have never been compelled to exercise their brains for a living." I smiled. His moods were familiar to me. Whenever a worthy case appeared, the gloom vanished immediately. The boredom vanished. A hound that had scented prey could not have appeared more alert. "Ah," he turned the envelope over. "Interesting. You recognize the sender?" "I recognize several things." He handed it to me. The paper was unusually fine. The address had been written in dark blue ink. The handwriting was elegant but hurried. "What do you observe, Watson?" I examined it carefully. "It comes from a wealthy individual." "Good. The paper is expensive." "Excellent. The writer appears educated." Holmes nodded. "Continue." I hesitated. "The hand trembles slightly. Perhaps age?" "Not age." He took the envelope back. "Fear." "Fear?" "Indeed." Before I could respond, Holmes broke the seal and unfolded the letter. As he read, his expression grew increasingly attentive. Finally, he passed the page to me. The letter read, "Mr. Sherlock Holmes, I beg that you come at once to Ravenshire Hall in Northumberland. A matter of the utmost urgency has arisen, one which local authorities appear unable to explain. A guest under my roof has vanished under circumstances so extraordinary that I scarcely dare commit them fully to paper. The situation threatens to become a scandal of national significance. I implore your assistance. Yours faithfully, Lord Percival Ravenshire." I read the letter twice, then a third time. "Vanished? Apparently. What circumstances?" "That, Watson, is precisely why the matter interests me." He walked toward the fireplace. "Tell me, what strikes you as peculiar?" "The mention of scandal." "Yes. And the fact that he avoids details." "Precisely." Holmes tapped the letter. "A frightened man often says too much. A truly frightened man says too little." I studied the signature. The name was familiar. Lord Ravenshire. Surely that family possesses one of the largest estates in northern England. Quite so. You know them. I know of them. Holmes retrieved a volume from a shelf. After consulting several pages, he nodded. An old aristocratic line. Considerable influence. Extensive holdings. Then why not explain the matter directly? Because, said Holmes, he fears interception. The answer surprised me. You believe the letter could be read by others. I believe Lord Ravenshire believes so. He placed the volume aside. The real question is not why he summoned me. It is why he waited. At that moment, footsteps sounded upon the stairs. A sharp knock followed. Before either of us could answer, the door opened. A man entered. He was perhaps 60 years of age, tall, distinguished, elegantly dressed despite signs of exhaustion. His grey hair appeared recently disordered. His face bore the unmistakable expression of one who had not slept. He paused upon seeing Holmes. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes?" Holmes inclined his head. "I am Lord Percival Ravenshire." The newcomer removed his gloves. His hands trembled noticeably. "You received my letter only moments ago. Then I am fortunate." Holmes gestured toward a chair. "Please sit." Lord Ravenshire did so heavily. For several seconds he stared into the fire. At last he spoke. "A man has disappeared." "A guest?" "Yes." "From your house?" "Yes." Holmes folded his hands. "When?" "3 nights ago. And the authorities? They have accomplished nothing." His voice tightened. "They insist he must have fled voluntarily." "You disagree?" "Absolutely." Holmes remained silent. The nobleman leaned forward. "There is something else." I saw genuine fear enter his eyes. The disappearance occurred from a locked room. The room fell silent. Even Holmes's expression changed slightly. A locked room? Completely. No secret passage? None. No signs of intrusion? None. No evidence of escape? None whatsoever. Lord Ravenshire swallowed. The guest retired shortly after 11 o'clock. And in the morning, the room was empty. I felt a chill despite the warmth of the fire. "Who was the missing man?" asked Holmes. The nobleman hesitated. His answer came quietly. "Sir Adrian Blackthorne." The name struck me immediately. Sir Adrian Blackthorne was a prominent industrialist. His financial influence extended throughout Britain. His disappearance would indeed provoke national attention. Holmes's eyes narrowed. "And who last saw him alive?" Lord Ravenshire hesitated. "A number of guests." "Names?" "I can provide them." "Good." Holmes rose. The excitement I knew so well had returned. Every trace of boredom had vanished. "We shall leave for Ravenshire Hall tomorrow morning." Relief flooded the nobleman's face. "You will take the case?" "My dear lord," said Holmes, reaching for his pipe, "a wealthy industrialist vanishes from a locked room in a country estate while surrounded by influential witnesses." A faint smile appeared upon his lips. "I should be deeply disappointed if I did not." Outside, the fog pressed against the windows of Baker Street. Inside, however, the first pieces of a far more dangerous mystery had already begun to fall into place. Neither Holmes nor I could yet know that Sir Adrian Blackthorne's disappearance would lead us into one of the most intricate deceptions we had ever encountered. Nor could we imagine that among the distinguished guests of Ravenshire Hall sat a man whose carefully constructed lies had remained hidden for nearly 20 years. The game, as Holmes often remarked, was now afoot. Chapter 2: The Road to Ravenshire Hall. The following morning found Holmes and me aboard the northbound express departing King's Cross Station. A cold rain had swept through London during the night, washing away much of the fog. By the time our train thundered across the countryside, patches of pale sunlight had begun to emerge between drifting clouds. Holmes occupied the seat opposite mine. A rug covered his knees. Several documents supplied by Lord Ravenshire rested beside him. He had scarcely spoken since our departure. This, in itself, was not unusual. Whenever Holmes confronted a fresh mystery, he preferred to absorb every available fact before forming conclusions. "Have you discovered anything?" I asked at last. Without looking up, Holmes replied, "Several things. About Sir Adrian Blackthorne. About everyone." I sighed. "Would you care to enlighten me?" "Not yet." He folded one of the documents. "At present, I possess information but not understanding. The distinction is essential." I settled back. "Then perhaps you might at least tell me something about the missing man." Holmes removed a photograph from the file. The image depicted a broad-shouldered gentleman in his late 50s. His expression appeared confident, even arrogant. "Sir Adrian Blackthorne," said Holmes. "Industrial magnate, investor, owner of steelworks, shipping concerns, and rail interests. He sounds successful, exceptionally. Any enemies?" Holmes smiled faintly. "A man who accumulates great wealth accumulates enemies as naturally as a ship accumulates barnacles." He handed me another page. "Read." I examined the document. It contained brief descriptions of the guests who had been present at Ravenshire Hall on the night of the disappearance. There were 7 names: Colonel Edwin Markham, retired military officer; Miss Evelyn Harcourt, philanthropist; Mr. Nathaniel Pike, solicitor; Lady Margaret Ashcombe, distant relation of the Ravenshire family; Professor Leonard Voss, historian; Mr. Julian Fenton, financier; and Dr. Elias Mercer, physician. A curious collection, indeed. Do any stand out? Holmes tapped one name. Professor Voss. Why him? Because he is the only guest whose presence appears entirely unrelated to Blackthorne's business affairs. Before I could question him further, the door of our compartment slid open. A ticket inspector entered. He checked our tickets, exchanged a few polite words, and departed. The moment the door closed, Holmes chuckled. "What is amusing?" The inspector. "I saw nothing unusual." "You observed very little, Watson." "Then enlighten me." Holmes lit his pipe. "The man served in the Royal Navy." I stared. "Impossible." "Hardly." "How could you know that?" "The answer lies in observation." He leaned back. "Notice the faded tattoo visible near his wrist." I did not. "An anchor. That proves nothing." "Quite right. Which is why I ignored it until I noticed his posture." "What about it?" "He favours his left leg." I considered this. "Injury?" "Precisely. The result of an accident aboard a ship." "How can you possibly know that?" Holmes smiled. "Because his gait resembles that of dozens of sailors I have observed. Furthermore, his vocabulary contains several nautical expressions, despite working on a railway." I shook my head. "You astonish me." "My dear Watson, the world is an open book. Most people merely fail to read it." The countryside rolled past outside the windows. Hours later, the train arrived at a small station nestled among the northern hills. A carriage awaited us. Lord Ravenshire himself had arranged transportation. The journey from the station to the estate took nearly 40 minutes. As we travelled, civilization gradually gave way to wilderness. Dense woods lined the road. Ancient stone walls emerged from the mist. The landscape possessed a lonely grandeur unlike anything near London. At last Ravenshire Hall appeared. The first glimpse was unforgettable. The manor stood atop a rise overlooking miles of countryside. Its grey stone walls seemed to grow directly from the earth. Tall towers rose against the darkening sky. Hundreds of windows reflected the fading afternoon light. "It resembles a fortress," I remarked. "An observation which may prove important," said Holmes. The carriage rolled beneath an imposing archway. Servants hurried forward. Moments later, Lord Ravenshire emerged from the entrance. He appeared even more exhausted than before. "Mr. Holmes." "My lord," the nobleman shook our hands. "I am grateful you came so quickly. Time is often significant." A shadow crossed Ravenshire's face. "I fear it may already be too late." Holmes studied him carefully. "Why do you say that?" The lord hesitated. Because something happened last night. My pulse quickened. A second disappearance? No. Then what? A message. Holmes stopped walking. A message? Yes. From Sir Adrian? We do not know. Lord Ravenshire reached into his coat and produced a folded sheet of paper. I found it beneath my study door this morning. Holmes opened it. The message contained only 6 words. Stop searching, or someone else vanishes. For several moments nobody spoke. The threat seemed almost tangible. Holmes examined the paper closely. Then he slipped it into his pocket. Interesting. Lord Ravenshire stared at him. Interesting? Very. You are not alarmed? My dear lord, anonymous threats are among the least original forms of communication. But surely, what alarms me, interrupted Holmes, is not the message. What then? The timing. We entered the manor. A vast entrance hall stretched before us. Portraits of stern ancestors lined the walls. A massive staircase rose toward the upper floors. The atmosphere felt oppressive. Every servant appeared nervous. Every whispered conversation ceased as we approached. Fear had settled over Ravenshire Hall. And fear, I knew, was often the faithful companion of secrets. Lord Ravenshire led us toward a drawing room. Several guests waited inside. The moment we entered, all eyes turned toward Holmes. I observed them carefully. Colonel Markham sat rigidly beside the fireplace. Professor Voss appeared distracted. Miss Harcourt looked genuinely worried. The others revealed little. Holmes acknowledged each with a brief nod. Then his gaze settled upon a tall man standing near the window. The gentleman's face remained composed. Yet something about him immediately attracted Holmes's attention. For the briefest moment, I noticed a flicker of recognition in my friend's eyes. It vanished instantly. Lord Ravenshire, said Holmes quietly, have all these individuals remained at the estate since Sir Adrian's disappearance? Yes. Without exception? Without exception. Holmes nodded. Excellent. The guests exchanged uneasy glances. Excellent? Repeated Colonel Markham. Certainly. Holmes' smile was thin. Because it means the truth is still here. Silence followed. Outside, the wind rattled against the windows. Inside, an invisible tension gripped the room. I sensed that every person present carried secrets. Whether those secrets were connected to Sir Adrian Blackthorne's disappearance remained unknown. Yet as I watched Holmes survey the gathering, I realized something important. He was no longer merely investigating a missing man. He was studying a collection of suspects. And somewhere among them sat an individual who knew exactly what had happened inside the locked room on the night Sir Adrian Blackthorne vanished. The hunt had begun in earnest. Chapter 3. The Chamber Without an Exit. The examination of Sir Adrian Blackthorne's chamber began immediately after our arrival. Holmes had never been a man inclined to waste time on social formalities when confronted by a mystery. The moment introductions concluded, he requested to see the room from which the industrialist had vanished. Lord Ravenshire personally conducted us to the upper floor. As we ascended the grand staircase, I observed the anxious expressions of several servants. The atmosphere within the house had become increasingly strained. Even the footmen moved with unusual caution. Fear had spread through Ravenshire Hall like a silent contagion. We proceeded along a broad corridor lined with portraits of former generations. The painted faces appeared to watch our passage. At length, Lord Ravenshire stopped before a heavy oak door. This is the room. Holmes examined it carefully before speaking. It has remained untouched, exactly as it was found. Excellent. A key emerged from the nobleman's pocket. The lock clicked. The door swung inward. We entered. The chamber was spacious and richly furnished. Dark wood panels covered the walls. A large fireplace occupied one side of the room. Heavy curtains framed 2 tall windows overlooking the estate grounds. A 4-poster bed stood near the centre. Nothing appeared disturbed. Nothing suggested violence. Nothing suggested disappearance. Yet somewhere within this room lay the answer to an impossible question. Where had Sir Adrian Blackthorne gone? Holmes remained motionless for nearly a minute. His eyes moved slowly across every visible detail. I recognized the expression. The room might appear ordinary to others. To Holmes, it was already speaking. He merely needed to learn its language. "When was Sir Adrian last seen?" he asked. Lord Ravenshire answered promptly. "At approximately 10:30. Who saw him?" "Several guests." "Doing what?" "Retiring for the evening." Holmes nodded. "And the door?" "Locked from the inside." "You are certain?" "Absolutely." "The windows?" "Locked as well." Holmes approached one of them. He tested the latch. Solid. Then he opened the window and examined the exterior. The drop to the ground measured nearly 30 feet. Beneath the window lay a bed of wet gravel. No ladder, no climbing marks, no footprints. Nothing. "The rain began shortly after midnight?" Holmes asked. "Yes." "Heavy rain?" "Very heavy." Holmes closed the window. "Interesting." He turned his attention toward the floor. For the next 20 minutes he conducted one of the most meticulous examinations I had ever witnessed. He inspected the carpet fibre by fibre. He measured distances. He studied the fireplace. He examined furniture joints. He even investigated the hinges of the wardrobe. Meanwhile, I attempted to identify anything remotely suspicious. My efforts proved unsuccessful. Everything appeared perfectly normal. Which, I suspected, was precisely the problem. At last, Holmes stopped beside a writing desk. "What was found here?" Lord Ravenshire approached. "Several papers. Business documents. Mostly." Holmes pointed toward a small silver inkstand. "This was Sir Adrian's." "Yes." The detective bent closer. A faint smile touched his lips. He removed a magnifying lens. "What have you found?" I asked. "Perhaps nothing." Which generally meant he had found something. He continued his inspection. Moments later, he crouched beside the fireplace. The ashes inside appeared ordinary. Burned coal. Charred wood. Nothing more. Yet Holmes sifted through them carefully. Suddenly he extracted a tiny black fragment, no larger than a fingernail. "What is it?" I asked. He slipped it into an envelope. "Evidence." "Of what?" "I haven't the slightest idea." His eyes gleamed. "Which makes it valuable." Lord Ravenshire watched with increasing bewilderment. "Do you see signs of foul play?" "Possibly." The nobleman swallowed. "Murder?" "Possibly." "Kidnapping?" "Possibly." "Voluntary disappearance?" "Possibly." The lord looked frustrated. "You seem unwilling to commit yourself." Holmes stood. "A physician who diagnoses before examining his patient is a fool." I coughed politely. He glanced toward me. "Present company excluded, of course." "How generous." The faintest smile appeared on his face. He resumed his inspection. This time he focused upon the bed. The blankets remained neatly arranged. Too neatly, Holmes noticed it immediately. "So," he touched the mattress. "Curious." "What is curious?" I asked. "Observe." He indicated the pillows. "There is evidence the bed was occupied." "Naturally." "Yet only briefly." I frowned. "How can you tell?" "The compression." I stared at him blankly. Holmes sighed. "Watson, imagine a man retiring for a full night's sleep. Very well. The mattress would display deeper impressions." I looked again. To my surprise, he appeared correct. So Sir Adrian entered the room and lay down, but did not remain there long. "Precisely." Lord Ravenshire looked troubled. "Then where did he go?" Holmes gazed around the room. "That is the essential question." At that moment, a knock sounded at the door. A servant entered nervously. "Excuse me, my lord." "What is it?" "The guests have assembled in the library." Lord Ravenshire nodded. "Very good." The servant departed. Holmes turned toward the doorway. "Excellent timing." "You wish to question them?" "I do." Before leaving, however, he paused beside the writing desk once more. Something had attracted his attention. A small object rested near the inkstand. A matchbox. Ordinary in appearance. Yet Holmes picked it up immediately. He examined the label, then the matches themselves. His eyes narrowed. Watson. Yes? Did Lord Ravenshire mention whether Sir Adrian smoked? The nobleman answered. He smoked cigars regularly. Holmes held up the matchbox. Then why are there no burned matches in the fireplace? Nobody replied. Because nobody possessed an answer. Holmes slipped the matchbox into his pocket. Another clue. Another inconsistency. Another piece of a puzzle whose final image remained hidden. We left the chamber and proceeded downstairs. The library proved every bit as impressive as the rest of the estate. Thousands of volumes occupied towering shelves. A fire burned brightly near the far wall. The assembled guests waited in uneasy silence. Holmes surveyed them carefully. Each face told its own story. Colonel Markham appeared irritated. Miss Harcourt seemed frightened. Mr. Pike looked uncomfortable. Professor Voss appeared distracted. Lady Ashcombe watched everyone closely. Dr. Mercer remained calm. Only one man displayed no visible emotion whatsoever, Mr. Julian Fenton. The financier stood near the window with remarkable composure. Holmes noticed him immediately. Indeed, I observed my friend's gaze linger upon him for an instant longer than the others. The detective then addressed the room. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for gathering. Nobody spoke. I shall be conducting individual interviews. A murmur spread among them. I understand this may be inconvenient. The murmur ceased. But I assure you, Holmes continued, the inconvenience suffered by an innocent witness is vastly preferable to the consequences faced by a guilty one. The silence that followed seemed almost physical. Then something unexpected occurred. A book fell from one of the shelves. The sound echoed through the room. Several guests started visibly. Holmes turned toward the fallen volume. For a brief moment his expression sharpened. He crossed the room, picked up the book, examined its cover, and smiled. The reaction lasted less than a second. Yet I knew Holmes well enough to recognize its significance. He had discovered something important, something he intended to keep entirely to himself. As the guests watched nervously, Holmes replaced the volume upon the shelf. Then he turned back toward the gathering. His face once again revealed nothing. But I knew better. The mystery of the locked room had just become considerably more complicated, and somewhere among the silent faces surrounding us, one person had suddenly become very afraid. Chapter 4. The Guests of Ravenshire Hall. That evening, Holmes commenced what he often described as the most valuable phase of any investigation. The study of people, Watson, he once remarked, is infinitely more revealing than the study of objects. Objects lie only when manipulated. People lie naturally. The library of Ravenshire Hall became our temporary headquarters. One by one, the guests were invited inside for questioning. A storm had gathered outside. Rain lashed against the tall windows. The wind moaned through the ancient chimneys. The atmosphere could scarcely have been more suitable for the examination of suspects. Holmes sat beside the fireplace. I occupied a chair near the writing desk, notebook in hand. Lord Ravenshire remained present at Holmes' request. The first guest to enter was Colonel Edwin Markham. The retired officer was a broad-shouldered man in his 60s, with an impressive military bearing. His grey moustache appeared capable of commanding a regiment on its own. He sat stiffly. Holmes began immediately. "You knew Sir Adrian Blackthorne?" "Yes." "Well?" "No." The answer came without hesitation. "We were acquainted, nothing more." "You had no business dealings?" "None." "No disagreements?" "Certainly not." Holmes steepled his fingers. "Then why did two witnesses report a heated argument between you on the afternoon before the disappearance?" The colonel blinked. For the first time, his confidence faltered. It was hardly an argument. What was it? A discussion. Regarding. The colonel hesitated. A military contract. Holmes remained silent. The pressure of that silence proved remarkably effective. At length the colonel sighed. Very well. Blackthorne invested heavily in manufacturing equipment supplied to the army. I believed some of the machinery defective, and he disagreed. Strongly. Did the disagreement become personal? Possibly. Holmes nodded. The interview continued for several minutes. Nothing overtly incriminating emerged, yet a degree of hostility clearly existed between the missing man and the colonel. When Markham finally departed, Holmes made a brief note. "Interesting," he murmured. The next guest was Miss Evelyn Harcourt. She entered with visible nervousness. A woman of perhaps 30 years, she possessed an intelligent face and calm demeanour despite her evident anxiety. Her relationship with Sir Adrian quickly proved more complicated. "You knew him well?" asked Holmes. "Reasonably well. How long?" "3 years." "And your opinion of him?" She hesitated. "I respected his accomplishments." "That was not my question." A faint flush appeared in her cheeks. "I found him difficult." "Why?" "He enjoyed controlling people." The answer surprised me. It also interested Holmes. Controlling them in what manner? He expected obedience, even from friends, especially from friends. As the interview progressed, another revelation emerged. Sir Adrian had proposed marriage to Miss Harcourt 6 months earlier. She had refused. The room became noticeably quieter after that disclosure. "Did he accept your refusal gracefully?" Holmes asked. "No." "What did he do?" "He continued to pursue the matter." "Relentlessly?" "Yes." Holmes exchanged a brief glance with me. Motive, at least in theory, had now appeared. When Miss Harcourt departed, Holmes remained thoughtful for some time. The third interview proved even more revealing. Mr. Nathaniel Pike, the solicitor, entered carrying an air of professional caution. He answered questions carefully, too carefully. Holmes noticed immediately. "You handled legal matters for Sir Adrian?" "Occasionally." "What sort of matters?" "Investments." "Nothing else?" "No." Holmes leaned forward. "Then why did you destroy correspondence belonging to him 3 weeks ago?" The solicitor turned pale. "I confess I nearly dropped my notebook." "Destroy correspondence?" "Yes." Holmes's voice remained calm. "A servant observed you burning papers in your chambers." Mr. Pike swallowed. His composure cracked. "They were personal documents." "Whose personal documents?" "Sir Adrian's." "Why destroy them?" The solicitor hesitated. "I was instructed to." "By whom?" No answer came. The silence itself became revealing. At last Holmes dismissed him. The next 2 interviews produced less dramatic results. Lady Margaret Ashcombe appeared genuinely distressed by the disappearance. Though she admitted disliking Blackthorne's arrogance, she possessed no obvious motive. Professor Leonard Voss proved equally interesting. The historian seemed absent-minded to an almost theatrical degree. He frequently lost track of questions. Several times he forgot what he had been discussing entirely. Yet Holmes observed him with unusual attention. When the professor finally departed, I remarked upon it. "You find him suspicious?" "Not suspicious." "Then what?" "Unusual." I waited. Holmes offered no further explanation. The 6th interview involved Dr. Elias Mercer. The physician displayed remarkable self-control. His answers were precise, professional, measured. Too measured, perhaps. "You attended Sir Adrian medically?" Holmes asked. "Occasionally." "His health?" "Generally excellent." "No chronic illnesses?" "None worth mentioning." Holmes tapped the arm of his chair. "No medications?" "A few minor prescriptions." "Which were?" The doctor listed several harmless remedies. Nothing seemed noteworthy. Yet when the interview concluded, Holmes appeared dissatisfied. "You expected something else?" I asked afterward. "Perhaps." "What?" "I am not yet certain." At last only one guest remained, Mr. Julian Fenton. The financier entered calmly. Of all the guests, he appeared least troubled by recent events. He was a handsome man in his early 40s, well-dressed, confident, Possessed of the easy charm often found among successful businessmen, he sat opposite Holmes. Neither man spoke for several seconds. An odd tension filled the room. Then Holmes began. "You have known Sir Adrian for many years, nearly 15. A close relationship? Professional. And profitable." Fenton smiled faintly. "For both parties. Business partners. Occasionally." Holmes watched him carefully. "No disagreements?" "Every partnership contains disagreements." "Any serious ones?" "No." The answer came too quickly. I noticed Holmes notice it. The detective reached casually into his pocket. He removed a small notebook. "What were you doing between 11 o'clock and midnight on the night Sir Adrian disappeared?" The financier did not hesitate. "Reading." "In your room?" "Yes." "Alone?" "Yes." "Can anyone confirm that?" "No." Holmes nodded. The answer seemed perfectly reasonable, yet I sensed dissatisfaction. The questioning continued. Then something unexpected occurred. Holmes mentioned a date, a seemingly insignificant date from nearly 10 years earlier. For the first time, Julian Fenton's expression changed. The alteration lasted less than a second. A tightening around the eyes, a brief stiffness, then it vanished. Most observers would never have noticed. Holmes did, so did I. The detective's voice remained casual. "Did anything significant occur that year?" Fenton smiled. "Not that I recall." "Really?" "Really." The interview ended shortly thereafter. When the financier departed, Holmes remained silent. Several minutes passed. Finally I spoke. "Well, what do you think?" "You dislike him." "Dislike is irrelevant." "Then you suspect him." Holmes stood and approached the window. Rain streaked the glass. Darkness covered the estate. "I suspect everyone." "You suspect him more than the others." The detective smiled slightly. "Perhaps." That answer confirmed my suspicion. A servant entered unexpectedly. "Excuse me, Mr. Holmes." "Yes?" "A gardener has requested to speak with you." Holmes turned immediately. "A gardener?" "Yes, sir." "What about?" The servant shifted uneasily. "He claims to have found something near the east grounds." The room became silent. Holmes's eyes sharpened. "What sort of something?" The servant swallowed. "A pocket watch, sir." "A watch?" "Yes." "Whose watch?" The servant hesitated. Then came the answer. "Sir Adrian Blackthorne's." A chill passed through me. Because the east grounds lay nearly half a mile from Ravenshire Hall, and if the missing man's watch had been discovered there, one of two possibilities existed. Either Sir Adrian had somehow left the locked room, or someone wanted us to believe he had. Both possibilities carried frightening implications. Holmes seized his coat immediately. "Come, Watson, at once." Outside, the storm continued to rage across the estate. Somewhere in the darkness, a new clue awaited us. And I had the distinct feeling that whoever had orchestrated the disappearance of Sir Adrian Blackthorne had just made their first mistake. Chapter 5. The Watch in the Rain. Within minutes of receiving the gardener's message, Holmes and I found ourselves crossing the rain-soaked grounds of Ravenshire Hall. The storm had intensified. Wind swept across the estate with mournful force, bending trees and scattering fallen leaves across the pathways. A lantern carried by the gardener cast a wavering circle of light before us. The man himself, a sturdy fellow named Hargreaves, appeared deeply unsettled. "I found it just before dusk, sir," he explained. "Where?" Holmes asked. "Near the East Grove. The exact location matters." "Of course, sir." The gardener led us along a narrow trail that descended toward a cluster of ancient oaks. The trees stood apart from the main grounds. Even in daylight, the place would likely have seemed gloomy. At night, beneath storm clouds and driving rain, it possessed an almost sinister character. At last Hargreaves stopped. "Here." Holmes raised his lantern. The beam illuminated a patch of wet earth. Several broken branches lay nearby. The gardener produced a pocket watch. I did not touch anything else. Holmes accepted the object. He examined it carefully. The initials engraved upon the cover matched those of Sir Adrian Blackthorne, A.B. There could be little doubt regarding ownership. "How certain are you?" I asked. Lord Ravenshire, who had accompanied us, answered, "Completely. I have seen him carry it countless times." Holmes opened the watch. The mechanism had stopped. He studied the hands. Then he smiled faintly. "What is it?" I asked. The watch ceased functioning at precisely 12 minutes past midnight. The significance escaped me. Holmes slipped the watch into his pocket. "We shall return to that detail later." He then turned his attention toward the surrounding ground. The rain had damaged much of the evidence, yet not all. Holmes knelt, examined the mud, measured distances, studied broken vegetation. For nearly 15 minutes he moved in complete silence. At last he stood. Interesting. That word again. I had learned long ago that Holmes employed it whenever a discovery proved especially important. "What have you found?" He pointed toward the earth. I moved closer. At first I saw nothing. Then I noticed faint impressions, footprints, several sets. Rain had blurred them considerably, yet traces remained. "Multiple individuals," Holmes said. "How many?" "At least 3. The gardener stared. "You can tell that?" "Quite easily." He indicated one impression. This individual wore riding boots. Another. This one possessed a narrower foot. A third. And this person limped. I looked more carefully. Sure enough, one series of marks appeared uneven. The right foot sank deeper than the left. Remarkable. Elementary. His eyes scanned the area once more. Then something caught his attention. A small object protruded from the mud near a tree root. Holmes retrieved it. A button, dark in colour, expensive, recently torn from a garment. "Useful?" I asked. "Potentially." He slipped it into an evidence envelope. The search continued. Several minutes later, Holmes discovered something far more significant. A partially buried cigarette stub. The rain had nearly destroyed it. Nearly. The detective examined it through his lens. Then his expression sharpened. "What is it?" This cigarette was not manufactured in Britain. "Foreign?" "Very." He handed it to me. I examined it carefully. The paper appeared unusual. The tobacco smelled different as well. "Where is it from?" "Turkey, I believe." "One of the guests smokes Turkish cigarettes," Lord Ravenshire answered. "Professor Voss." Holmes glanced toward him. "Only Professor Voss?" "So far as I know." The detective placed the cigarette stub into another envelope. The discovery clearly interested him, yet before he could comment further, a flash of lightning illuminated the grove. For an instant the surrounding trees stood revealed in brilliant white. And during that instant Holmes noticed something. He crossed quickly toward one of the larger oaks. There, carved into the bark, appeared a symbol. Not a natural mark, not random damage, a deliberate carving. 3 interlocking circles, freshly cut. The edges remained pale. "Curious," Holmes murmured. I examined it. "What does it mean?" "I haven't the faintest idea." That answer surprised me. Holmes rarely admitted ignorance, which meant the symbol truly puzzled him. We returned to Ravenshire Hall shortly thereafter. The hour had grown late. Most of the household had retired. Holmes, however, showed no interest in sleep. Instead, he occupied a small study provided for our use. The pocket watch lay upon the desk. Beside it rested the button, the cigarette stub, several notes, and the anonymous threat received that morning. For nearly an hour, Holmes examined everything in silence. I finally interrupted. "You have a theory." "Several. Care to share one?" "No," I sighed. "Why do I bother asking?" "Because hope springs eternal." He smiled faintly. Then his expression became thoughtful. "Tell me, Watson, what is the greatest weakness of a lie?" "The possibility of being discovered." "No." "The contradiction." "Closer." He tapped the pocket watch. "The greatest weakness of a lie is complexity." I considered this. "What do you mean?" "The truth requires no maintenance." He stood. A lie, however, must constantly defend itself. He paced slowly. Every false statement creates new vulnerabilities. Then someone has lied? Without question. One of the guests? Almost certainly. Before I could press further, a knock sounded at the door. Lord Ravenshire entered. He appeared troubled. "Mr. Holmes." "Yes?" "There is something I neglected to mention." Holmes immediately became attentive. "Go on." The nobleman hesitated. "I considered it unimportant." Those are dangerous words. I realize that now. "What did you omit?" Lord Ravenshire drew a breath. "The night before Sir Adrian disappeared, he requested a private meeting." "With whom?" "Me." "About what?" "He wished to discuss another guest." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Which guest?" The answer came quietly. "Julian Fenton." The room became silent. Even the wind beyond the windows seemed to pause. "What did he say?" Holmes asked. Lord Ravenshire looked uncomfortable. "He claimed Mr. Fenton had concealed something important for many years." "What sort of thing?" He refused to elaborate. "Did he provide evidence?" "No." "Any details at all?" "Only one." Holmes leaned forward. "What was it?" Lord Ravenshire swallowed. Then he spoke. He said that if the truth became public, several prominent men would be ruined. The significance of the statement struck all of us immediately. Holmes remained motionless, his gaze fixed upon the fire. The silence stretched. At last he spoke. "When did this conversation occur?" "Approximately 24 hours before the disappearance." "And nobody else heard it?" "No." Holmes nodded slowly. Another piece had entered the puzzle. A significant piece. Sir Adrian Blackthorne had possessed information. Information involving Julian Fenton. Information capable of destroying reputations. And within a day, Sir Adrian had vanished. The connection seemed obvious, perhaps too obvious, which made it dangerous, because Holmes distrusted obvious explanations more than any other kind. The hour approached midnight. Lord Ravenshire departed. I expected Holmes to retire shortly thereafter. Instead, he moved toward the window. For several moments he stared into the darkness outside. Then he spoke quietly. "Watson." "Yes?" "Tomorrow we shall revisit the locked room." "Why?" "Because something there is wrong." I blinked. "Something specific?" "Yes." "What?" Holmes smiled. The expression carried equal parts satisfaction and concern. "The room itself." Before I could demand clarification, he extinguished the lamp. And thus ended one of the most perplexing days I had ever spent in the company of Sherlock Holmes. Yet as I retired for the night, one thought refused to leave me. Somewhere within Ravenshire Hall, a carefully constructed deception was unfolding, and judging by Holmes's expression, he had just discovered the first crack in its foundation. Chapter 6. The Room That Lied. The following morning dawned cold and grey. The storm had exhausted itself during the night, leaving behind a landscape washed clean by rain. A thin mist drifted across the grounds of Ravenshire Hall, clinging to hedgerows and stone walls like reluctant ghosts. I joined Holmes shortly after breakfast. To my surprise, he had clearly been awake for several hours. Several sheets of paper covered the table before him, architectural sketches, measurements, notes, and what appeared to be a rough floor plan of the upper level of the manor. "You have been busy." "I have." "What have you discovered?" Holmes folded one of the drawings. "An impossibility," I sighed. "Another one." "The same one." He stood. "Come, Watson. We are returning to Sir Adrian's room." Within minutes we found ourselves once more climbing the grand staircase. Lord Ravenshire accompanied us. The nobleman appeared increasingly anxious. Every hour that passed without progress seemed to weigh heavily upon him. When we entered the chamber, Holmes immediately closed the door behind us. Then he did something unexpected. He began measuring. Again. Every wall, every window, every section of floor, every piece of fixed furniture. For nearly half an hour he worked without explanation. At last he stopped. A gleam of satisfaction appeared in his eyes. "There." Lord Ravenshire frowned. "There what?" The lie. Neither of us understood. Holmes pointed toward the eastern wall. "What do you see?" "A wall," I answered. "Obviously. An excellent beginning." He crossed the room. "Now tell me something else." I looked again. The wall appeared perfectly ordinary. Dark wood panels, decorative moulding. Nothing unusual. I see nothing remarkable. "Exactly." Holmes tapped the panelling. "The wall is lying." Lord Ravenshire stared. How can a wall lie? By pretending to be something it is not. Without warning, Holmes produced a small pocket knife. He inserted the blade into a narrow seam between two decorative panels. A moment later, a section shifted slightly. My astonishment must have been obvious. "Good heavens," Holmes smiled. "The reaction I expected." The concealed section moved outward by perhaps half an inch. Not enough to reveal an opening, but enough to demonstrate something important. The wall was not original. It had been altered. Lord Ravenshire looked stunned. "I had no idea." "I believe you." Holmes examined the structure carefully. "The modification appears recent." "How recent?" "Within the last few years." The nobleman shook his head. "But why?" "That is the correct question." For the next 20 minutes, Holmes investigated the concealed structure. At last, he stepped back. His expression had become thoughtful. "The alteration serves no practical purpose." "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means someone wished to conceal something. Is there a hidden passage?" "No." "Then what?" "The space behind this wall is too narrow." He consulted his measurements. "Approximately 18 inches." I frowned. "That seems useless." "Not entirely." He crouched near the floor, then his hand disappeared beneath the edge of the panelling. A second later, he withdrew a small object, a folded scrap of paper. My pulse quickened. "Hidden?" Very carefully. The paper appeared old. Holmes unfolded it cautiously. 3 words had been written upon it. "Trust no one." Nothing else. No signature, no date, no explanation. Lord Ravenshire stared. "What does it mean?" Holmes folded the note. "At present, very little. Yet I noticed something. He seemed pleased, not by the warning itself, by the existence of the warning. The discovery confirmed a suspicion. Someone had hidden that message deliberately, someone who feared being overheard or watched. The detective slipped the note into his pocket. Then he moved toward the fireplace. Again. I had noticed that many of Holmes's investigations returned repeatedly to the same locations. He believed important clues often hid in plain sight. This occasion proved no exception. The black fragment recovered from the ashes the previous day remained on his mind. After several minutes of searching, he located another, then a third. Each tiny piece appeared similar, burned, blackened, fragile. "What are they?" I asked. Holmes placed them side by side. "Not paper. No. Not cloth. No." I waited. His eyes narrowed. Then suddenly he smiled. "A photograph." I blinked. "A photograph. Part of one." He held a fragment toward the light. A faint trace of chemical coating remained visible. The remains of a photographic print. Burned deliberately? Certainly. Lord Ravenshire looked puzzled. Why would someone burn a photograph? Holmes glanced toward him. Because photographs preserve truths. The answer carried significance beyond its simplicity. Someone had destroyed an image. Someone feared what it showed, and someone had done so inside the room where Sir Adrian Blackthorne disappeared. The implications were obvious. Yet, before further discussion could occur, a knock sounded at the door. A servant entered hurriedly. His face had gone pale. "My lord, what is it?" The man swallowed. "There has been an incident." Every muscle in Holmes's body seemed to sharpen instantly. "What sort of incident?" "The library, sir." "What about it?" The servant hesitated. Then he delivered words that chilled the room. "Someone broke in during the night." Lord Ravenshire stared. "Broke in?" "Yes, my lord." "What was taken?" The servant's answer came immediately. "Nothing." Holmes frowned. "Nothing?" "No, sir." "Then what was the purpose?" The servant looked genuinely frightened. Something was left behind. A silence followed. What was left? Holmes asked quietly. The man swallowed again. A message. 20 minutes later, we stood inside the library. The room had been searched, not violently, not carelessly. Books remained largely undisturbed. Furniture remained intact, yet evidence of intrusion existed. Several drawers had been opened, papers examined, shelves inspected. Someone had clearly been looking for something, or verifying its absence. The message awaited us upon the central desk. A single sheet of paper, 4 words written in bold black ink. You are too late. No signature, no explanation, no attempt at concealment. The message had been intended for Holmes. That much was obvious. The detective studied it silently. Then he examined the desk, the ink, the paper, the surrounding room. His expression remained unreadable. Finally he spoke. Interesting. I laughed despite myself. Everything is interesting. Only the important things. He turned toward Lord Ravenshire. Who possesses access to this room? All guests. And servants? Some. Holmes nodded. His gaze drifted toward the towering bookshelves. Then something unexpected happened. A realization. I saw it arrive. Not gradually. Not uncertainly. Suddenly. Like lightning illuminating a dark landscape. His eyes sharpened. The room vanished around him. For a brief moment he appeared to see only the solution. Then the moment passed. I knew that look. I had witnessed it many times. Sherlock Holmes had discovered a connection. Not the entire truth, not yet, but enough to change the direction of the investigation. Watson. Yes? Do you recall the book that fell from the shelf during our first evening here? Of course. I believe I now understand why. My pulse quickened. Why? Holmes smiled faintly. Because it was not an accident. The answer struck me immediately. Someone had caused it to fall. Deliberately. But for what purpose? To distract? To signal? To conceal something? Holmes clearly knew more than he intended to reveal. For now. As we left the library, he paused beside a window, overlooking the mist-covered grounds. The case is beginning to take shape. At last. Yes. But we remain far from the truth. How far? His eyes followed the distant tree line. Closer than our adversary realizes. The confidence in his voice was unmistakable. For the first time since arriving at Ravenshire Hall, I sensed genuine certainty. The scattered clues were no longer isolated fragments. They were beginning to form a pattern, a hidden structure beneath the chaos. And somewhere within that structure lay the answer to 3 critical questions. Why had Sir Adrian Blackthorne disappeared? What secret connected him to Julian Fenton? And who was so desperate to keep the truth buried that they were willing to threaten Sherlock Holmes himself? The coming days, I felt certain, would provide answers. Whether we would survive long enough to hear them remained another matter entirely. Chapter 7. The Secret of Julian Fenton. I have often observed that Sherlock Holmes possessed an extraordinary talent for looking backward when everyone else was looking forward. Most investigators concern themselves exclusively with recent events. Holmes understood that the origins of a crime frequently lay buried years earlier, sometimes decades. Human nature rarely changes, Watson, he once remarked. A man's past is often merely his future waiting for an opportunity. The morning following the discovery of the message in the library found Holmes in a state of intense concentration. A collection of documents occupied the large table in our temporary study. Some had been supplied by Lord Ravenshire. Others had arrived by telegraph from London. Several originated from newspaper archives. Every one of them concerned a single individual, Julian Fenton. The financier had become the centre of Holmes's attention. Not because evidence directly implicated him, quite the opposite. The evidence surrounding him appeared unusually clean, far too clean, and Holmes distrusted perfection. "Observe this," he said, sliding a newspaper clipping across the table. I adjusted my spectacles. The article was nearly 20 years old. Its headline concerned the collapse of a shipping company operating along the eastern coast. The business had failed spectacularly. Investors lost substantial sums. Several executives disappeared from public life shortly afterward. I looked up. What am I supposed to notice? Names. I examined the article again. There, among the directors, appeared a familiar entry, J. Fenton. My eyes widened. Julian Fenton. Perhaps. The initial is insufficient proof. Holmes folded the clipping. Yet the coincidence interests me. A knock interrupted us. Lord Ravenshire entered carrying a leather portfolio. I found these among old records. Holmes accepted it immediately. What are they? Guest registers. From previous years? Yes. The detective opened the portfolio. His eyes moved rapidly across the pages. Then he stopped. A faint smile appeared. Excellent. What have you found? I asked. Holmes pointed toward an entry. Dated 11 years earlier. One particular name appeared prominently. Sir Adrian Blackthorne. Nothing unusual there, but directly beneath it appeared another, Julian Fenton. Both men attended Ravenshire Hall together before. Indeed. Does that matter? It might. Holmes continued examining the register. Then he found something else. Another gathering, another year. Again the same two names, then another, and another. A pattern emerged. The two men had crossed paths repeatedly over more than a decade, far more often than casual acquaintances should. Yet during questioning, both had minimized the relationship. Interesting. Very interesting. Holmes closed the register. They knew one another far better than either admitted. Before further discussion could continue, a servant arrived. A telegram had been delivered. Holmes opened it immediately. The contents clearly pleased him. Without explanation, he slipped it into his pocket. You received information from London? Yes. What sort? Useful. I sighed. His capacity for withholding information remained undiminished. At noon, Holmes requested another interview with Julian Fenton. The financier arrived promptly. As before, he appeared calm, confident, entirely self-possessed. Yet I noticed something subtle. His confidence seemed slightly strained. The pressure of recent events was beginning to show. Holmes wasted no time. Mr. Fenton, have you ever been associated with the Eastern Maritime Shipping Company? The effect was immediate, tiny, brief, yet unmistakable. A flicker in the eyes, a momentary tightening of the jaw, then composure returned. I have not. Holmes nodded. You are certain? Quite. Interesting. The financier shifted slightly. Why? Holmes opened a file. Because 20 years ago, a man named Jonathan Fenton served as one of its directors. No response. The detective continued. He vanished shortly before the company's collapse. Still no response. And according to records supplied this morning, Jonathan Fenton possessed a younger brother. The silence deepened. Holmes leaned forward. Julian Fenton. For several seconds nobody spoke. The financier's face remained expressionless, yet I sensed danger, invisible but real. At length he smiled. A remarkable effort. Thank you. Unfortunately, you are mistaken. Am I? My brother existed. Ah, but he died. When? 20 years ago. Convenient timing. A flash of irritation crossed Fenton's features. The first genuine emotion I had seen from him. Holmes noticed it too. Tell me, said the detective quietly, why did Sir Adrian Blackthorne begin investigating your family history? The question struck like a bullet. For the first time, Julian Fenton seemed genuinely surprised. His composure faltered, only briefly, but enough. Holmes had scored a hit. I have no idea. No? No. Then perhaps you can explain why Sir Adrian spent 6 months examining financial records connected to the collapse of Eastern Maritime. The financier stared. The room felt suddenly smaller, the air heavier. At last he rose. I believe this conversation is finished. Holmes remained seated. As you wish. Without another word, Julian Fenton departed. The door closed behind him. I immediately turned toward Holmes. You rattled him. Yes, you believe he is lying. Without question. What about? That remains unclear. He stood and crossed toward the window. Outside, clouds drifted across the estate. For several moments he remained silent. Then he spoke. Someone is afraid. Fenton? Certainly. Afraid of exposure? Possibly. Then Sir Adrian discovered something. Almost certainly. The implications were obvious. Sir Adrian Blackthorne had uncovered a secret connected to Julian Fenton's past. Within days he vanished. The connection grew stronger. Yet Holmes remained cautious, too cautious to declare victory. That evening produced another development, one that altered the investigation dramatically. The entire household gathered for dinner. Conversation remained subdued. The disappearance continued to dominate every thought. I noticed Holmes observing the guests more than participating. His attention shifted constantly. Faces, expressions, reactions, tiny details invisible to others. Halfway through the meal, Professor Leonard Voss excused himself unexpectedly. Nothing unusual there. Several minutes later, Holmes followed. Again, nothing unusual. Yet nearly 20 minutes passed before either man returned. When Holmes finally reappeared, his expression had changed. Not dramatically, but enough for me to notice. The look reminded me of a hunter who had discovered tracks. Fresh tracks, dangerous tracks. After dinner, I confronted him privately. You found something? Perhaps. It involved Professor Voss. Yes. What? Holmes considered. Then, to my surprise, answered, The professor lied. About what? His memory. I stared. What do you mean? The absent-mindedness. Yes, it is exaggerated. The answer stunned me. You believe he pretends? Partially. Why would anyone do that? Holmes smiled faintly. An excellent question. Before I could ask another, a commotion erupted downstairs. Voices, shouting, running footsteps. Holmes moved instantly. We hurried into the corridor. Servants rushed toward the entrance hall. Lord Ravenshire appeared moments later. His face had gone pale. What happened? A trembling footman answered. The East Tower, my lord. What about it? The door was locked. Yes? The servant swallowed hard. We heard noises from inside. Silence. Every person present seemed frozen. What sort of noises? Asked Holmes. The answer came in a whisper. A man's voice. My pulse quickened. A voice. Inside a locked tower. At Ravenshire Hall. The same estate where a man had vanished from a locked room. Holmes's eyes narrowed immediately. Who heard it? 3 servants. What did the voice say? The footman hesitated. Then he spoke words that sent a chill through every listener. It called for help. The corridor fell silent. Because there existed only one possibility everyone immediately considered. One name. One terrifying possibility. Sir Adrian Blackthorne. And if that possibility proved true, then the mystery of Ravenshire Hall had just entered a far more dangerous phase. Chapter 8. The Voice in the Tower. The announcement transformed Ravenshire Hall instantly. Within moments, the corridors filled with anxious voices. Servants gathered in frightened clusters. Guests emerged from drawing rooms and chambers alike. The atmosphere of uncertainty that had haunted the estate since Sir Adrian Blackthorne's disappearance suddenly evolved into something more dangerous. Hope, and hope, when mixed with fear, can be a volatile force. The East Tower stood at the far end of the manor. Older than the rest of the structure, it rose above the surrounding buildings like a stone sentinel watching over the estate. Its upper chambers had not been regularly occupied for decades. According to Lord Ravenshire, only storage rooms remained there now. Yet 3 servants claimed to have heard a man's voice, a voice calling for help. Holmes wasted no time. Lanterns were gathered. Keys were fetched. Within minutes, a small party made its way through the winding corridors leading toward the tower. I accompanied Holmes, along with Lord Ravenshire, Colonel Markham, Dr. Mercer, and several servants. The guests had insisted upon joining us. Curiosity overcame caution. The narrow staircase ascending the tower spiraled upward through cold stone walls. The higher we climbed, the stronger the wind became. It whistled through cracks in the masonry with eerie persistence. At last we reached a heavy iron-bound door. Lord Ravenshire produced a key. "This chamber has remained locked." "Since when?" Holmes asked. "Several years." "No recent access?" "None." The nobleman inserted the key. The lock resisted briefly, then turned. A hush fell over the group. The door creaked open. Lantern light flooded the chamber beyond. Dust. Furniture draped in white sheets. Crates. Broken chairs. Nothing more. The room was empty. Completely empty. The disappointment proved immediate. Several servants exchanged confused glances. "But we heard it." "I swear we heard it." "So did I." Holmes entered without comment. His eyes moved slowly around the chamber. The others followed. The room measured perhaps 30 feet across. 2 narrow windows overlooked the eastern grounds. Everything appeared undisturbed. Yet Holmes did not appear disappointed. If anything, he seemed intrigued. "What interests you?" I asked quietly. "The servants." "Their story?" "No." He pointed toward the floor. "Their honesty." I followed his gaze. Several fresh footprints crossed the dust. The prints belonged to multiple individuals, our own. Nothing unusual. Then I noticed another, a separate track, older, distinct, leading toward one of the windows. Someone was here. "Exactly." Lord Ravenshire heard the remark. "What?" Holmes crouched beside the prince. "Someone entered this room recently." The nobleman looked astonished. "Impossible." "Why?" The door remained locked. "Perhaps." Lord Ravenshire frowned. "Perhaps." Holmes stood. "My lord, there is a considerable difference between a locked door and an inaccessible room." The statement puzzled everyone present. Before further explanation could be offered, Holmes crossed toward the nearest window. He examined the frame carefully, then the sill, then the surrounding stone. At last he nodded. "There we are." "What have you found?" I asked. "A route. Into the room? Out of it." My astonishment must have shown. "The window?" "Precisely." I approached. The drop outside appeared substantial, nearly 40 feet, far too dangerous for an ordinary person. Yet Holmes pointed toward the outer wall. There, partially concealed by darkness, ran a series of decorative stone projections, weathered, narrow, but potentially usable. A climber? An experienced one. The revelation stunned Lord Ravenshire. "You mean someone entered the tower from outside?" "Almost certainly." Holmes continued his examination. Several minutes later he discovered something beneath a covered table. A coil of thin rope. Recently used. The fibers remained clean, unweathered, fresh. Another clue. Another contradiction. The locked tower had become remarkably similar to the locked room. Both mysteries appeared impossible, until one looked closely. At last Holmes gathered the group, the voice. Everyone immediately focused upon him. "What about it?" asked Colonel Markham. "I believe it was genuine." The answer surprised me. "You think someone truly called for help?" "Yes." "But why?" Holmes smiled faintly. "That is precisely what interests me." The search concluded shortly afterward. Most of the household returned downstairs. Yet Holmes remained thoughtful, very thoughtful. The discovery of the tower seemed to have confirmed something, though what exactly remained unclear. As we descended the staircase, he spoke quietly. "Watson." "Yes?" "Do you recall the watch?" "Of course." "The one found in the East Grove?" "Yes." "And where is the grove located?" I considered. "Near the tower." "Exactly." A chill ran through me. The connection suddenly appeared obvious. The watch, the footprints, the rope, the voice, the tower, all clustered within the same section of the estate. The pattern was no longer accidental. Somebody wanted our attention focused there, or perhaps somebody desperately wished to keep it away. Back downstairs, Holmes retired to the study. For nearly an hour he worked in silence. Maps of the estate lay spread across the table. He compared distances, timings, locations, relationships. The puzzle pieces continued shifting inside his mind. Then another interruption arrived. This one proved far more dramatic. A servant entered, carrying a sealed envelope. It was found beneath Mr. Holmes' door. The detective accepted it immediately. No stamp, no address, no identifying marks. He opened it, read the contents, and for the first time since arriving at Ravenshire Hall, I witnessed genuine surprise, only for a second, yet unmistakable. "What is it?" I asked. Without answering, Holmes handed me the letter. 3 lines had been written, nothing more. "Blackthorne is alive. Do not trust the professor. Meet me at midnight in the old chapel." No signature, no explanation, no indication of authorship. I read it twice, then a third time. Could it be genuine? Certainly. Could it be a trap? Equally certainly. The answer did little to comfort me. Lord Ravenshire looked alarmed. "You cannot intend to go." Holmes smiled. "My dear Lord, anonymous invitations are among the most irresistible features of criminal investigations. Someone may be attempting to kill you. That possibility merely increases the educational value." The nobleman stared. I shook my head. Only Sherlock Holmes could treat mortal danger as an intellectual opportunity. As midnight approached, preparations were made. The old chapel stood on a remote section of the estate, unused for many years. Isolated, perfect for secrecy or ambush. The wind had risen again by the time Holmes and I departed the manor. Clouds concealed the moon. The path ahead remained visible only through lantern light. The ancient chapel emerged gradually from the darkness, a crumbling stone structure surrounded by twisted trees. Its stained glass windows had long since shattered. Its bell tower stood empty. The place possessed an air of abandonment that made even me uneasy. We approached cautiously. The door hung partially open. Holmes entered first. I followed. The interior lay silent. Empty pews, broken stone, dust. No sign of life, no sign of our mysterious correspondent. For several minutes we searched. Nothing. Then Holmes stopped suddenly. "What is it?" He pointed toward the altar. Something rested there. A single object. A small leather notebook, recently placed. We approached carefully. Holmes opened it. The pages contained names, dates, financial records, detailed notes, and on the inside cover appeared 2 words written in Sir Adrian Blackthorne's unmistakable hand: "Insurance file." The significance hit us both immediately. This notebook mattered. It mattered enough for someone to risk leaving it here. It mattered enough to arrange a secret meeting. And judging by Holmes's expression, it contained information capable of shaking the entire investigation. But before either of us could examine it further, a sound echoed through the chapel. A footstep, not ours, somewhere behind us. Holmes spun instantly. The lantern light swept across the darkness. For a brief instant, I glimpsed a figure moving toward the rear exit, tall, fast, and already disappearing into the night. "After him!" I shouted. But Holmes did not move. To my astonishment, he remained perfectly still, watching, listening, thinking. The mysterious figure escaped. Yet Holmes seemed entirely unconcerned. Instead, he lowered his gaze to the notebook in his hands and smiled. The expression carried a certainty I had not seen before, a certainty that suggested one remarkable possibility. The unknown messenger had not merely given us a clue. They had just given Sherlock Holmes exactly what he needed. Chapter 9. The Insurance File. The return journey from the old chapel proved one of the most unusual I had ever experienced in Sherlock Holmes's company. Ordinarily, when presented with a significant discovery, Holmes either became intensely animated or withdrew into complete silence. On this occasion, he did both. For several minutes, he walked without speaking. Then he would suddenly mutter observations to himself. Then silence again. The notebook remained tucked securely inside his coat. More than once I attempted to examine it. More than once Holmes prevented me. Patience, Watson. Patience is easier when one knows something. Quite. And I know nothing. That is your usual condition during investigations. I laughed despite myself. The old familiar banter suggested something important. Holmes was pleased. Very pleased. Which meant the notebook had confirmed a major portion of his theory. By the time we returned to Ravenshire Hall, the hour had passed 1 in the morning. The household slept. Only a few lamps remained lit. Holmes immediately retired to the study. There he finally opened the notebook upon the desk. I moved beside him. This time he offered no objection. The contents astonished me. The notebook consisted of detailed records spanning nearly 20 years. Names, transactions, meetings, investments, correspondence. Some entries occupied only a few lines. Others filled entire pages. Every one had been written by Sir Adrian Blackthorne. He kept records, very thorough records. Of what? Holmes turned several pages. Of people. The answer puzzled me. Then I began reading. The significance emerged immediately. Sir Adrian had been conducting a private investigation for years, possibly decades, and many of the individuals mentioned within the notebook occupied influential positions throughout Britain: businessmen, politicians, investors, lawyers, industrialists, powerful men. Some names appeared repeatedly. One of them was Julian Fenton. Another was Professor Leonard Voss. My pulse quickened. Voss? Indeed. Holmes tapped the page, which raises an interesting question, such as, what possible connection exists between a financier and a historian? I examined the entries more closely. Several passages had been heavily underlined. One notation in particular caught my attention. Voss possesses original records. Fenton knows this. Neither realizes I know. I looked up. Original records? Apparently. Records of what? Holmes turned more pages. Then he stopped. For a moment he simply stared. His expression changed. Not surprise, not satisfaction. Recognition. The look of a man encountering a fact he had long suspected. At last he spoke. There it is. What? The motive. I leaned forward eagerly. Holmes read aloud. 20 years ago, Eastern maritime shipping collapsed under suspicious circumstances. Investors were ruined. Evidence disappeared. Witnesses vanished. Yes. He tapped another entry. Blackthorne believed the collapse was deliberate. The implications became obvious. Fraud? On a massive scale. I stared at the notebook, but that happened decades ago. Exactly. And Sir Adrian was still investigating it. Apparently, Holmes continued reading. Then another entry appeared. This one seemed even more significant, written in darker ink than the rest, as though the author considered it especially important. Fenton is not protecting himself. He is protecting someone else. The room fell silent. Holmes read the sentence twice, then a third time. A fascinating observation. What does it mean? It means Julian Fenton may not be the central figure. That possibility had not occurred to me. Then who is? Holmes smiled faintly. I don't know, yet. The word remained unspoken, but implied. At approximately 2 o'clock, another revelation emerged. One hidden among pages of seemingly unrelated notes. A date, a location, and a list of attendees. The date corresponded to a gathering held nearly 19 years earlier. The location lay in Northumberland, remarkably close to Ravenshire Hall. Among those present appeared 3 names: Julian Fenton, Leonard Voss, and Adrian Blackthorne. I looked up sharply. They knew one another 20 years ago. Yes, long before anyone admitted. Precisely. The discovery changed everything. The relationship between the three men extended far beyond recent business dealings. Their history stretched backward decades, perhaps all the way to the beginning of the mystery. At dawn, Holmes finally closed the notebook. He appeared exhausted, yet energized, a contradiction possible only in exceptional circumstances. You have your theory, most of one. What remains missing? The center. I frowned. The center? The explanation that unites everything. He rose, crossed to the window. Morning light had begun creeping across the estate. Mist drifted over the eastern grounds. For several moments he remained thoughtful. Then he spoke quietly. "Watson." "Yes? Tell me something." "Very well. If Sir Adrian discovered a dangerous secret, why did he come to Ravenshire Hall?" The question surprised me. To confront someone? Possibly. To expose them? Perhaps. Holmes shook his head. "Neither explanation satisfies me." "Why not?" "Because intelligent men do not walk voluntarily into traps." The statement lingered in my thoughts. Before I could respond, a knock sounded at the door. Lord Ravenshire entered. He looked concerned. "You have been awake all night." "Yes, I fear there is more bad news." Holmes immediately became attentive. "What happened?" The nobleman hesitated, then spoke. "Professor Voss is missing." The effect was immediate. Holmes straightened. "Missing? His room is empty. When was he last seen?" "Shortly after midnight." I exchanged a glance with Holmes. The timing could not be coincidence. Not after the anonymous warning, not after the notebook, not after learning of Voss's connection to the old conspiracy. "Has anyone searched the grounds?" Holmes asked. "Yes." "And?" "Nothing." The detective's expression remained unreadable. Yet I recognized the significance instantly. The case had escalated. Again, another disappearance, another impossible absence, another individual connected to the mystery. Lord Ravenshire continued. "There is something else." "What?" "A note. Of course. There always seemed to be another note." "Where?" "Inside the professor's room." The nobleman produced a folded sheet. Holmes opened it. The message contained only one sentence. "The dead should remain buried." Silence followed. The wording seemed deliberate, threatening, yet strangely specific. "The dead," Holmes repeated, his eyes narrowed. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. Not because he found the message amusing, because he found it informative. "What is it?" I asked. "The author has made an error." "How?" Holmes handed me the note. I examined it carefully. Nothing seemed unusual. It appears straightforward. "Exactly." I looked up. "What am I missing?" "The message assumes something." "What?" Holmes moved toward the fire. His eyes gleamed. "It assumes Professor Voss knows the truth." The realization struck me, and if the message assumed that, then someone believed Voss possessed knowledge worth silencing. Knowledge connected to the past. Knowledge connected to Eastern Maritime. Knowledge connected to Sir Adrian Blackthorne. The chain became increasingly clear. Yet one mystery remained larger than all the others. Where was Sir Adrian? Alive? Dead? Hidden? Imprisoned? And if he truly lived, why had he not come forward? Holmes seemed closer than ever to answering those questions. But events at Ravenshire Hall were moving rapidly now. Dangerously rapidly. The hidden conspiracy Sir Adrian had spent years investigating was beginning to unravel, and whoever stood at its centre had grown desperate. Desperate men, I had learned, often made mistakes, but they were also capable of terrible things. As Holmes folded the note and slipped it into his pocket, I saw the familiar expression settle across his face. The hunt was nearing its conclusion, and somewhere on the estate, perhaps closer than any of us imagined, the final pieces of the puzzle were already moving into place. Chapter 10. The Man Who Never Existed. The disappearance of Professor Leonard Voss transformed the atmosphere at Ravenshire Hall more dramatically than any previous event. When Sir Adrian Blackthorne vanished, confusion had followed. When threatening messages appeared, fear emerged. Now suspicion flourished openly. Every guest watched the others. Every servant whispered. Doors were locked. Conversations ceased whenever footsteps approached. The estate had become a prison, populated by anxious inmates. Holmes, however, appeared strangely invigorated. The latest developments had not complicated the case in his mind. They had simplified it. I recognized the signs immediately. His movements had become more decisive, his questions more focused, his periods of silence shorter. Sherlock Holmes was approaching a conclusion. The morning after Professor Voss's disappearance, a series of telegrams arrived from London. Holmes read them carefully, one by one. Several produced no visible reaction. Then he reached the final message. A slow smile appeared. There we are. I looked up. What is it? The answer to a question. Which question? Who Julian Fenton really is. The statement startled me. Surely we know that. Do we? Holmes handed me the telegram. The contents were brief, yet astonishing. Investigators in London had searched official records extending back nearly 30 years. The results revealed a remarkable absence. There existed no verified documentation concerning Julian Fenton prior to the collapse of Eastern maritime shipping. No university records, no military records, no business records, nothing. The man seemed to emerge from nowhere, as though he had simply appeared. I read the telegram twice, then a third time. Impossible. Not at all. But every person has a history. Precisely. Holmes lit his pipe. And when a history cannot be found, one must ask why. The implications became increasingly disturbing. You believe Fenton is using a false identity. I am now quite certain of it. Then who is he? Holmes exhaled a thin stream of smoke. A better question would be this. What? Who was he? Before I could press further, Lord Ravenshire entered. The nobleman appeared exhausted. Lack of sleep had left visible marks beneath his eyes. You requested the household assemble? Yes. Holmes stood. I would like everyone present in the library. Immediately. Within half an hour the guests gathered. The surviving guests, at least. Professor Voss remained missing. Sir Adrian Blackthorne remained missing. Everyone else occupied seats around the room. The atmosphere crackled with tension. No one knew why Holmes had called the meeting. Several appeared nervous. One appeared alarmed. Julian Fenton. The financier concealed the reaction well. Yet not well enough. Holmes noticed. So did I. When silence settled over the room, Holmes began. Ladies and gentlemen, I have spent the past several days examining a mystery. No one spoke. A man vanished from a locked room. He paced slowly before the fireplace. A second man disappeared shortly thereafter. His gaze moved across the assembled faces. Threats were delivered, evidence concealed, records destroyed. Still nobody interrupted. Holmes stopped. And throughout it all, one question remained unresolved. He turned toward Julian Fenton. Who benefits? A faint tightening appeared around the financier's eyes. The detective continued. At first glance, the answer seems obvious. He paused. Too obvious. Several guests exchanged uncertain glances. Holmes approached a table. Upon it rested several documents. The notebook from the chapel, newspaper clippings, copies of financial records, the accumulated evidence of the investigation. I have discovered something rather interesting. His voice remained calm. Julian Fenton does not exist. The room erupted. Several people spoke simultaneously. Lord Ravenshire stared in disbelief. Lady Ashcombe gasped. Even Colonel Markham appeared shocked. Only Julian Fenton remained silent. The financier's face had gone pale, but he said nothing. Holmes raised a hand. The room quieted. Allow me to clarify. He picked up a document. 20 years ago, Eastern maritime shipping collapsed. Several guests nodded. The company lost enormous sums. He selected another paper. Several individuals vanished shortly thereafter. Another pause. One of those individuals was named Jonathan Fenton. The silence deepened. Holmes's gaze settled upon the financier. Jonathan Fenton never died. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. At last, Julian Fenton smiled. A cold smile. A dangerous smile. An interesting theory. Thank you. Unfortunately, it is wrong. Is it? Holmes produced another document. The signatures match. A second. The handwriting matches. A third. The financial transfers match. The smile faded. Holmes stepped closer. You are Jonathan Fenton. For the first time, genuine emotion crossed the man's face. Not fear, not surprise. Anger. Pure anger. The room felt suddenly smaller, more dangerous. You have no proof. I possess considerable proof. The financier rose slowly. His calm had vanished. Suppose I am Jonathan Fenton. Very well. What then? Holmes smiled faintly. Then we arrive at the interesting part. A tense silence followed. Why did you change your identity? Julian Fenton offered no answer. Why disappear after the collapse? Still no answer. Why spend 20 years concealing your past? Nothing. The detective nodded. Exactly. He turned toward the others. Because the collapse was not an accident. The statement landed heavily. Holmes continued. It was a fraud. Several guests visibly reacted. Lord Ravenshire looked stunned. Lady Ashcombe covered her mouth. Colonel Markham muttered something under his breath. The detective pointed toward the notebook. Sir Adrian discovered evidence. Evidence connecting Jonathan Fenton to the scheme. Julian remained silent, yet the fury in his eyes had become unmistakable. However, Holmes continued, that is not the most important revelation. The room quieted once more, because Jonathan Fenton was not acting alone. Now even the financier looked surprised. Holmes saw it. A tiny reaction, yet revealing. The detective smiled. There was a partner. No one spoke. A second individual. A second architect of the fraud. Julian's expression changed again. This time not anger. Concern. Very brief. Very telling. Holmes noticed immediately. So, the detective folded his arms. That interests you. Still no answer. Holmes turned away. The silence stretched. Then he delivered words that transformed the case entirely. I no longer believe Sir Adrian Blackthorne was the intended victim. A collective murmur swept through the room. I stared. What? Holmes continued calmly. Sir Adrian became dangerous. Certainly, but he was never the true target. The statement seemed absurd. Everything revolved around Blackthorne, the investigation, the disappearances, the threats, the notebook, the secret conspiracy. Yet Holmes appeared completely confident. If not Blackthorne, asked Lord Ravenshire, then who? The detective's eyes hardened. Professor Leonard Voss. The room fell silent. Absolute silence. Because suddenly everything felt different. The warning in the chapel. The message found in Voss's room. The mysterious note. The old records. The professor's connection to the past. A horrifying possibility began taking shape. Holmes continued. Professor Voss possesses something. What? Asked Lady Ashcombe. The original records. The words echoed through the library. Holmes nodded. The evidence capable of exposing everything. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Then, unexpectedly, Julian Fenton laughed. The sound carried no amusement, only bitterness. You are clever, Mr. Holmes. The detective inclined his head slightly. But you are late. The room became still. Very still. Holmes's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? For several seconds the financier said nothing. Then he smiled again. This time the expression looked almost triumphant. Ask yourself a question. What question? Julian's gaze drifted toward the window, toward the mist-covered grounds beyond. Then he answered quietly. If Professor Voss possessed the records... A pause. Where is he now? The silence that followed felt almost unbearable, because for the first time since arriving at Ravenshire Hall, I sensed genuine urgency in Holmes. Not uncertainty, not confusion, urgency. The game was entering its final stage, and somewhere on the estate, a missing professor carried secrets powerful enough to destroy lives, if he still lived. That final uncertainty lingered heavily over the room. For the first time, even Sherlock Holmes seemed aware that time might be running short. And if Julian Fenton's reaction meant what Holmes suspected it meant, then the next 24 hours would determine not merely the outcome of the investigation, but whether its most important witness survived long enough to reveal the truth. Chapter 11. The Trap at Ravenshire. The confrontation in the library marked a turning point in the investigation. For the first time since our arrival, the hidden forces operating within Ravenshire Hall had been dragged partially into the light. Julian Fenton, Jonathan Fenton, as Holmes now firmly believed him to be, had been exposed before witnesses. Yet the exposure accomplished less than one might imagine. No confession followed, no dramatic collapse, no sudden revelation. Indeed, if anything, Julian appeared more dangerous than before. A cornered animal may become desperate. A cornered criminal often becomes resourceful. That afternoon, Holmes withdrew almost entirely from company. He spent several hours alone with Lord Ravenshire, examining old maps, estate records, and architectural plans. When I attempted to join them, I found the door politely but firmly closed. Such behavior generally indicated one thing: Holmes had formulated a strategy. And when Holmes formulated a strategy, secrecy became essential. Late in the evening, he finally summoned me. I entered our temporary study to find him standing before the fireplace. Several documents lay spread across the table. His violin rested nearby. Whenever Holmes reached the final stages of a difficult case, music often accompanied his thoughts. "You have a plan?" "Yes." "Would you care to reveal it?" "Partially." I sighed. "That is progress, at least." A faint smile crossed his face. "Tell me, Watson, what happens when a criminal believes victory is near?" "He becomes careless." "Precisely." Holmes picked up a sheet of paper. "For several days, our adversary has remained cautious." He gestured toward the accumulated evidence. The threats, the disappearances, the manipulation, all carefully executed. He folded the paper. "But now matters have changed." "How so?" "We have forced movement." The answer intrigued me. Holmes continued. "Whoever stands behind these events understands that I am approaching the truth, and that worries them. It should." He crossed to the window. Night had fallen once more over Ravenshire Hall. The estate seemed quiet, too quiet. "Therefore," Holmes continued, "they must act. Tonight? Possibly. What do you intend to do?" His eyes gleamed. "Provide an opportunity." The details emerged gradually. Holmes intended to spread a rumor. A very specific rumor. Word would quietly circulate through the household that Professor Voss had been found, alive, hidden, and willing to reveal everything. The information would be false, at least partly. Yet Holmes expected someone to react, someone desperate enough to take action. It is bait, exactly. And if nobody responds, they will. The certainty in his voice left little room for doubt. The trap was set shortly before midnight. Only a handful of individuals knew the truth. Myself, Holmes, Lord Ravenshire, and Inspector Lestrade, who had arrived quietly from London earlier that evening at Holmes' request. The presence of Lestrade surprised me. The Scotland Yard detective had travelled with remarkable speed. His arrival suggested Holmes anticipated arrests, perhaps multiple arrests. "About time," Lestrade remarked. "I've been receiving telegrams from you for days. You should feel honoured." "I'd prefer clarity." "You frequently receive neither," the inspector grumbled. Yet I could tell he was excited. Difficult mysteries appealed to him nearly as much as they did to Holmes. though his methods differed considerably. Shortly after midnight, the participants took their positions. The chosen location was the old chapel, the same chapel where the mysterious notebook had appeared. Holmes believed the setting appropriate. If someone intended to silence Professor Voss, they would likely strike where they believed him hidden. Lanterns were extinguished, footsteps minimized. The surrounding grounds disappeared beneath darkness. We waited. 10 minutes passed, then 20, then 30. Nothing. Lestrade grew restless. "Perhaps your criminal has more sense than you imagined." Holmes merely smiled. Patience. Another 15 minutes elapsed. Then came a sound. A faint one, almost imperceptible, the crunch of gravel. Holmes's posture changed instantly. He had heard it too. A shadow moved among the trees, then another. My pulse quickened. The figures approached cautiously. Whoever they were, they believed themselves unobserved. The first entered the chapel. The second remained outside, watching, guarding. Holmes touched my arm lightly. A signal. Wait. Not yet. Inside the chapel, a lantern suddenly flared. Someone had lit it. The dim glow illuminated a figure standing before the altar. A figure searching, looking, expecting. The trap had worked. But something unexpected happened. The second figure entered as well. Both individuals now occupied the chapel. Holmes frowned. Clearly this development surprised him. I sensed immediate recalculation. The situation had changed. Then a voice echoed through the darkness. A familiar voice. "You're too late." The words came from within the chapel. Both figures froze. I recognized the speaker instantly. Professor Leonard Voss. The effect proved explosive. One of the intruders stepped backward. The other spun toward the sound. Confusion erupted. Lantern light danced wildly across ancient stone walls. And in that moment Holmes acted. Now. Hidden officers emerged from every direction. Lestrade charged forward. I followed. The chapel exploded into motion. One intruder attempted escape. Another reached inside a coat. For one terrifying instant I feared a weapon. Instead, a packet of papers appeared. Documents. Old documents. The man clearly intended to destroy them. A struggle followed. Brief, violent, decisive. Within seconds, Scotland Yard officers overwhelmed both suspects. The lantern rolled across the floor. Shadows leapt across the walls. Then stillness returned. Breathing heavily, I turned toward the prisoners. The first was immediately recognizable. Julian Fenton, or Jonathan Fenton. The second figure remained partly concealed. Holmes stepped forward. His expression revealed neither surprise nor satisfaction, only confirmation. "Good evening, Doctor." The prisoner lowered his head, and I felt genuine shock. Dr. Elias Mercer, the physician, the calm professional doctor, the man almost everyone had overlooked. Lestrade stared. Mercer. The doctor said nothing. Holmes nodded slowly. As I expected, I looked from one man to the other. The truth struck me gradually. Not Julian alone, not one conspirator, two. The partnership, the second architect of the fraud, the missing piece, Dr. Mercer. The realization seemed almost unbelievable, yet Holmes appeared entirely unsurprised. Professor Voss emerged from the shadows. Tired, disheveled, but alive, very much alive. The sight provoked visible reactions, especially from Julian. For the first time since our arrival, genuine fear entered his eyes. The professor carried a leather case, protected carefully. "These are the originals," he said quietly. Holmes accepted the case. "The records? All of them." The physician closed his eyes. The battle was over. He knew it. Everyone knew it. Yet one question remained unanswered. Perhaps the most important question of all. I voiced it immediately. "Where is Sir Adrian Blackthorne?" Silence followed. Julian Fenton lowered his gaze. Dr. Mercer remained motionless. Neither spoke. Holmes studied them both. Then his expression changed. Not triumph. Concern. Deep concern. A realization had occurred, a troubling one, because despite everything we had uncovered, the fraud, the false identity, the conspiracy, the missing records, the second conspirator, one mystery remained unresolved, the central mystery, the original mystery, Sir Adrian Blackthorne. Holmes turned slowly toward Julian. One final question. The prisoner looked up. Where is he? For several seconds, Julian remained silent. Then he answered, and the answer chilled every person present. I don't know. The chapel fell silent, because Holmes believed him. I saw it immediately. The detective's eyes narrowed, not because he detected a lie, because he detected the absence of one. Julian Fenton truly did not know, which meant something extraordinary. The conspiracy explained much, but not everything. The disappearance of Sir Adrian Blackthorne remained unsolved, and as Holmes stared into the darkness beyond the chapel doors, I realized the most astonishing possibility of all. We had captured the criminals. Yet we had not solved the case, not completely, not even close. Somewhere beyond the fraud, beyond the conspirators, beyond the decades-old deception, another secret remained hidden. A secret that connected directly to the vanished industrialist, and Sherlock Holmes had only just begun to understand it. Chapter 12. The Missing Guest of Ravenshire Hall. The arrest of Julian Fenton and Dr. Elias Mercer should, by all ordinary standards, have concluded the affair. Scotland Yard possessed ample evidence. The original records recovered by Professor Voss detailed years of financial deception. The false identity had been exposed. The conspiracy stood revealed. Yet Holmes remained dissatisfied, profoundly dissatisfied. As we returned to Ravenshire Hall in the early hours of the morning, he spoke scarcely a word. The prisoners had been secured. Professor Voss was safe. The mystery appeared solved. To everyone except Sherlock Holmes. At breakfast, Lord Ravenshire finally addressed the matter directly. You have won. Holmes looked up from his coffee. Have I? Certainly. The criminals have been caught. Some criminals. The nobleman frowned. What does that mean? Holmes set down his cup. It means Sir Adrian Blackthorne remains missing. Silence followed. No one could dispute the point. The disappearance that had begun the entire investigation still lacked explanation. Julian Fenton had not abducted him. Dr. Mercer had not imprisoned him. Neither man knew his location. The fact had been established repeatedly during questioning, and Holmes believed it, which left us with an uncomfortable conclusion. Something else had happened, something entirely separate from the conspiracy. That realization dominated the remainder of the morning. By noon, Holmes had returned once more to Sir Adrian's chamber. I accompanied him. So did Lestrade. The Scotland Yard inspector appeared puzzled. I don't understand. Neither do I, Holmes replied. That is the problem. The room looked exactly as before. The bed, the desk, the fireplace, the windows, the concealed wall. Nothing had changed. Yet Holmes examined everything again, and again, and again. Hours passed. The detective moved through the room with extraordinary patience, searching, measuring, observing, thinking. At last he stopped before the writing desk, the same desk he had inspected repeatedly, the same desk that had yielded several clues. His gaze settled upon the silver inkstand, then the chair, then the floor. A peculiar expression appeared. I recognized it instantly. The look of a man seeing something he should have seen much earlier. Oh, the word escaped him softly. Lestrade stared. What? Holmes smiled, then laughed quietly, not mockingly, not triumphantly, simply with appreciation. My dear Watson. Yes? The room has been telling us the truth from the beginning. I looked around helplessly. Then perhaps it might tell me as well. Holmes pointed toward the desk. What is missing? I examined it. Papers, inkstand, pens, blotter. Nothing unusual. I see nothing. Precisely. He tapped the desk lightly. A businessman, yes. A meticulous businessman, certainly. He retires to his room. I nodded, naturally, and then burns a photograph, apparently, yet leaves his papers untouched. The significance arrived gradually. Then all at once, he was interrupted. Exactly. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Not attacked, interrupted. The distinction mattered, a great deal. The detective paced slowly. Sir Adrian entered the room. He lay briefly upon the bed. He burned a photograph. He sat at the desk. And then something caused him to leave, voluntarily. Lestrade frowned. But the door was locked. Yes. And the windows secured. Yes. Then how did he leave? Holmes smiled. Through the door. The inspector stared. What? Through the door. Impossible. Not at all. Holmes crossed to the entrance. Consider. He pointed toward the lock. When was the room examined? The next morning. Exactly. Who first discovered the disappearance? Lord Ravenshire. The answer struck me immediately. I turned toward Holmes. You believe the room was locked afterward? Precisely. The detective nodded. The entire locked room mystery was an illusion. Everything suddenly began falling into place. The bed, the desk, the absence of struggle, the missing matches, the interrupted work. Sir Adrian had not vanished from a sealed chamber. He had left, willingly. The room merely created the appearance of impossibility. Lestrade frowned. But why? Holmes's expression darkened. That is the final question. The answer arrived unexpectedly. That afternoon, through a servant, the man appeared nervous, almost reluctant. Mr. Holmes. Yes? I remembered something. Holmes became instantly attentive. What? The servant shifted uneasily. It concerns Sir Adrian. Go on. The night he disappeared. Yes? I saw him. The room became silent. Holmes stepped forward. Where? Near the chapel road. My pulse quickened. The chapel? Yes, sir. What time? Shortly after midnight. The servant swallowed. He wasn't alone. Every person present leaned forward. Who was with him? Holmes asked quietly. The servant hesitated, then answered, A woman. The revelation stunned us all. A woman? Yes. Can you identify her? The servant nodded slowly. I believe so. Holmes's eyes narrowed. Who? The answer came softly. Miss Evelyn Harcourt. The room fell silent. Absolute silence. Because for the first time since the investigation began, an entirely new possibility emerged. A possibility nobody had considered, not once. Holmes remained motionless, thinking, reconstructing, re-evaluating. Then he smiled, a genuine smile, the final piece. At last. Watson. Yes? The photograph. I stared. What about it? It wasn't evidence. No? It was a farewell. The meaning struck me immediately. Sir Adrian had burned the photograph deliberately, not to conceal a crime, to close a chapter of his life. Holmes turned toward the window. His expression carried quiet admiration. Remarkable. What is? The simplicity. He laughed softly. We spent days pursuing conspiracies, fraud, threats, disguises, false identities, and all the while the missing man was solving his own problem. The truth unfolded rapidly after that. Miss Harcourt was questioned privately. Within an hour she confessed everything. Not criminally, simply honestly. For years, Sir Adrian Blackthorne had pursued wealth, power, influence. The investigation into the old conspiracy had consumed him. Yet during that pursuit he had developed genuine affection for Evelyn Harcourt. The feeling had changed him. Profoundly, more profoundly than anyone realized. Weeks before arriving at Ravenshire Hall, Sir Adrian had uncovered enough evidence to destroy Fenton and Mercer. The notebook, the records, the investigation. Everything was complete. For the first time in decades, he found himself free and facing a choice. Continue the life he had always lived, or abandon it. The answer surprised even him. On the night of his disappearance, Sir Adrian received a message, not from criminals, not from conspirators, from Evelyn. They met secretly near the chapel. They spoke for hours, and before dawn, Sir Adrian made a decision. He would disappear, not from danger, from his former life. The evidence confirmed it. Funds withdrawn weeks earlier, property purchased abroad through intermediaries, arrangements prepared carefully, patiently, quietly. The entire plan had existed before the disappearance occurred. He staged it, Lestrade said. No, Holmes shook his head. That is the beauty of it. He did nothing. The inspector looked confused. Holmes smiled. The room created a mystery only because everyone assumed there was one. Sir Adrian simply walked away. The locked door, the assumptions, the confusion, the conspiracies, all had obscured a remarkably simple truth. The missing man did not wish to be found. Several days later, a final letter arrived, postmarked from the continent, addressed to Lord Ravenshire. Inside was a brief message. Sir Adrian confirmed his safety, his intention never to return, and his gratitude toward those who had assisted him. No forwarding address accompanied the letter. None ever would. The mystery of the missing guest had finally ended, not with murder, not with kidnapping, but with choice. A choice hidden beneath layers of coincidence, deception, and misunderstanding. As Holmes and I departed Ravenshire Hall, I reflected upon the extraordinary events we had witnessed. The fraud had been exposed, the conspirators arrested, the missing professor recovered, and the vanished industrialist explained. Yet what remained strongest in my memory was Holmes himself. The detective sat opposite me in the railway carriage returning to London, calm, thoughtful, victorious. At length I spoke. "You seem unusually pleased." "Do I?" "Yes. Perhaps," I smiled, "because you solved the mystery." Holmes gazed through the window at the passing countryside, then shook his head. "No." "Then why?" For several moments he remained silent. Finally he answered, "Because for once, Watson, the man at the centre of the mystery escaped exactly as he wished." The train thundered southward. The case of the missing guest of Ravenshire Hall had reached its conclusion. Another mystery had passed into history. Another impossible puzzle had yielded before the relentless logic of Sherlock Holmes. And as the towers of London gradually emerged on the horizon, I could not help but wonder what strange adventure would next arrive at Baker Street. For with Sherlock Holmes, the game was never truly over. It merely awaited its next beginning.